Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Ysolda and if you watched my last video, you'll know that I kind of starting a little podcast. It's still a bit of an experiment, but here we are with episode 2, and if you did watch my previous video and you took the time to leave a comment or a thumbs up or you subscribed to my channel, I really appreciate it. I was completely blown away by how many people were interested in more videos like this. I've been a knitting pattern designer for about 18 years. Over the last few years, I've gone through a lot of life and work kind of transitions. I sold yarn online and kits and supplies for several years, and about 2 years ago I scaled all of that back, partly to give me a lot more time to focus on the creative side and on designing, and I've been getting back into garment design in a big way, which has been really fun, and I really enjoyed having a chance to talk in a bit more depth than I can in like an Instagram caption or something like that about my process and what goes into the garments that I'm creating. So I thought I would make another video kind of following on from the last one, and I've got a little update on the preview knitting for the sweatshirt pattern that I shared last time. I pulled out this summer top to wear, so I will tell you a little bit about this. This is an older pattern, and I also have made really great progress on my muscle raglan that I shared last time, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I go into more depth about, I think I sort of mentioned the phrase compound raglan in kind of a throwaway comment last week, so I just wanted to go into a bit more depth about what a compound raglan is, why you might want to knit one, or why if you're a pattern designer you might want to learn more about the whole concept of a compound raglan, because it's a really great way to make a raglan that will fit any body type really well. I also had a question in the comments of my last video about how to fit a particular body type. That person had a really good question, and I started typing out an answer, and I was like, actually I think I could go into more depth and answer that more easily in a video. So I'm going to try and answer that question, and if you do have any questions about knitting techniques or garment fit or one of my patterns, there's something you're confused about, you can always reach out to our customer support. That's just support@ysolda.com, or you can post in my online community, the knitwear, where you'll get help from my team, but also a lot of knitters in our community who've already knit a lot of my patterns. And that's free to join. I will put a link in the show notes if you are not already a member of the network. We would love to have you. As I said, it's free to join. It's where we host knit-alongs. It's where my courses are also hosted. So if you do sign up to a course, then you don't have to go like learn a new platform. We try and keep all it together, and it's also where we host private groups for our preview knits, which kind of work like a little private knit-along group. Yeah. So if you are interested in joining the network, I'll pop the link down below. And if you do have a question that you would like me to answer in a video, you can absolutely always say so. You can leave a comment on this video if you have questions that you want me to answer. I'm not really sure how many questions we'll get, so I might not be able to answer all of them in video, but I will keep an eye out for things that would make a good in-depth discussion or that might be helpful to a lot of people, so that I can kind of answer those in these videos. I shared this sweatshirt in my previous video, but if you didn't see it, you can obviously go back and watch this episode 1 of this Ysolda Knits podcast. But it is a top-down drop shoulder sweater. It's a modified drop shoulder, which just means that the where the sleeve joins the body, there is a bit of shaping, rather than the shoulder width coming kind of straight down to the body with no fabric that kind of wraps around your underarm. I like having that extra fabric. I find it just makes it more comfortable, it makes it easier to move, and it also has a bit of shoulder shaping on the back. So that's some short row shoulder shaping so that you don't have too much extra fabric in the shoulder that then slouches down. So it ends up being kind of a slouchy but sort of refined fit sweatshirt. And we're going to call that pattern the Anyday Sweatshirt because it really is like becoming a go-to garment already for me. I want to make more than one in other colors, and I just can see it being such a wardrobe staple that you could reach for any day. So if you are interested in joining the preview knit, we sent out the call for preview knitters this morning. We do have a specific mailing list for our preview knitting calls, but because this one isn't a sort of secret or hidden design, I've already shared it, and because I had so much interest on the last video of people interested in becoming preview knitters, I will put a direct link to that preview call in the notes section. The deadline to apply as a preview knitter for the Anyday Sweatshirt is July 31st. That's this coming Monday. And then we will be selecting preview knitters over about the following week. We will get in touch if you have been accepted as a preview knitter. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we do tend to get more applications for each size than we can really realistically work with. So please know it's absolutely nothing personal if we don't select you as a preview knit for this one. It's just a numbers game that we have to kind of select a number of people for each size that is manageable for us. And if you'd really like to join in on the preview knitting, but purchasing the yarn for the preview knit just isn't within your budget at the moment, and you're welcome to use any suitable yarn, you don't have to use the yarn that I used, but if it's not in your budget, there is simply a checkbox on the application form so that you can let us know if yarn support is something that would be the thing that makes a difference between whether you can participate or not. We aren't able to provide yarn for all of our preview knitters, but we do have a budget for that, and we don't want that to be the reason that someone isn't going to apply. So please go ahead and use that if that's something you need. It's no questions asked. It's just an honor system. So please go ahead and use it. Oh, and lastly, I wanted to mention that our sort of penciled in release date for this pattern is mid-October. So the deadline for the preview knit is October 12th, and I'm hoping that is a nice chunk of time to knit any of the sizes. I know that sometimes the deadlines for preview knits, especially for garments, especially if you're knitting a larger size, can be really difficult to fit into the rest of your life. So we are trying to work far ahead and give kind of fair timelines for those. So hopefully that feels reasonable. If it doesn't, do reach out, let us know. On episode 1, Julie Knits in the Woods 2987 left a comment that I thought was a really good question, so I wanted to try and answer that in a bit more depth. Fit is a goal for me this year. I find fit is something that applies to all sizes as each body has its own needs. Absolutely. Shoulder and chest fit are issues for me. My rib cage is quite a bit narrower than my upper chest and full chest. However, going up a size to accommodate the difference usually means the body is too oversized. Tricky. I'd love to hear more about design, fit, and thinking about how to select a size to use as a base, and then next steps to customize further for fit. It's a really good question, and I think it's a fit question that applies to really across the size range. First of all, I'm not 100% sure on whether Julie means that their shoulders and sort of upper section of their torso above the underarm are proportionally larger than the lower section of their torso, or whether they mean that that is true and also their bust, their full bust, is larger in proportion to the rest of the body. I would deal with those in two different ways, and possibly the best option is to combine them. If it's that you want a sort of wider shoulders, you have broader shoulders, I would combine 2 or more sizes, and what I would do is, depending on the style of the garment, whether you're working top down or bottom up, I would find a way to reduce the amount of shaping, the number of stitches that you're either binding off or casting on across the underarm, so that you have a larger upper area, and then the difference between that and the sort of circumference or width around the body is smaller. If you need that width to continue until sort of below the bust, I would approach that slightly differently. I would follow, if you're working top down, I would follow the pattern to kind of below the widest part of the bust. And then if you want the body to be smaller, the simplest thing is to decrease your stitches. There are a few ways to do that. If the garment is already kind of fitted and has waist shaping, you'd want to recalculate that waist shaping, probably just at the front, so that you're decreasing more stitches below the sort of full bust at the front chest. That probably means decreasing more rapidly than in the pattern. If your pattern doesn't have any waist shaping, then you probably want to add it in, and you can do that with a vertical bust dart. So you can work decreases kind of directly below the apex of the bust in a column until you get down to your desired sort of body circumference that you want the narrower part of the body to be. If there is not a huge difference, probably less than 2 inches, so 1 inch on each side, you could do those decreases at the side seam as well, which will give you a subtler effect. And you can kind of space those out over quite a few rows so that you get like a smooth diagonal, or you can do them, if you're doing sort of darts, below the fullest part of the bust, kind of call it the apex, it's really the nipple. You can do quite rapid decreases if you want that sort of look of it pulling in under the bust, or again you can make them kind of slower if you want a subtler look. I'm saying decreases, but you'd do the same thing for bottom up. You'd start with your kind of the size that works for a smaller size that works, and then increase to what you need for the chest. If you're probably above like a B or C cup, I would do more shaping at the front. If it's more that this whole area is proportionally larger than kind of standard sizing charts, then you might want to kind of increase more evenly around the whole body, so the front and the back. And that probably does make sense to do at the sides, whether you have seams or just markers in. Either increase up to or decrease, if you're doing top down, down to your smaller circumference. So I hope that is helpful. Without exact numbers or an idea of what sort of sweater construction you're working on, it's harder to answer that question more fully, but I thought it was a really good question because I think it's more common that we see things about fitting knitwear that's solely focused on what to do if your bust is proportionally larger, you're a larger cup size, and less about how to work broader shoulders and a sort of smaller body circumference. I do have a couple of patterns that have kind of regular and broad shoulder sizing incorporated into them, which might be useful to look at even if you don't want to knit those particular designs. One of those is the Brunston sweater. It's a top-down colorwork yoke with all gender fit options, and as part of that I incorporated directions for broader shoulders with a bigger yoke. The actual circumference of the yoke is larger for each size than it is in the regular shoulder version, and then there's less shaping to kind of curve around the bottom of the armpit to get to the dimensions that you need for the chest. So that might be something that's worth having a look at and having a look at how I did that, or it might be a pattern that you want to try because it makes it easier to kind of dial in that custom fit for your body. On my muscle bar sweater, I've gotten to the end of the yoke and I haven't yet separated off the body and sleeve stitches. If you've never made a top-down sweater or a top-down raglan, basically once you've completed your yoke, then you will put your sleeve stitches on hold and cast on some stitches across the underarm. So across here, these stitches will kind of come together. I'll create a little bridge with some new cast on stitches, and then I'll be able to knit the body in the round. But I wanted to show it to you at this stage because you can kind of almost see it more clearly before those kind of pieces are joined in the round. I mean, this is knit in the round, but before the body and sleeves are separated, you can sort of see what's going on better. I told you I started this again. I knit a whole yoke, and I just wasn't happy with the neck shaping. The neck was a bit too tight, so I'm really happy with this version. I love how well it sits like a classic crew neck. It's not too scooped, it's not too loose, it's not too tight. And I've tried it on with a few t-shirts, and it doesn't show my t-shirt neckline, which I really like. So I'm super happy with that. And this is Stranded Dye Works sock yarn in the Transcendence colorway, and it's really fun to work with all these neon speckles. And I mentioned last time that this was a compound raglan, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about what that means. So I'm going to pop this back on the stand so I'm not kind of awkwardly hugging the mannequin so I can show you, and then I will talk a little bit more about what a compound raglan is. Before getting into the details of what a compound raglan is, I thought it would be good to do a quick overview of what a regular raglan sweater is before we get into what makes a compound raglan different. So at its most basic, a raglan garment is a rectangle of fabric that's created by joining front and a back and two sleeves together with either diagonal seams, where my black lines are, or in knitting seamless garments, those seams can be created with columns of paired increases if you're working top down, or paired decreases if you're working bottom up. And you can see that that creates a very simple garment style. It's not quite as rigid when it's not made of paper, but you have basically a T shape where the sleeves will continue out this way, and you'd expect these kind of pieces to bend down in an actual fabric garment, but you end up with a reasonable amount of extra fabric around the underarm that works as a hinge. The original sort of raglan garments were created particularly to give a wider range of movement. So that's what you'd expect. It's not a particularly fitted style, and you have that easy sort of wide range of movement in the arms, which comes with sometimes some bunching when you have your arms down by your sides. So if I take this off my little mannequin, you can see that at its simplest, you'll have a square neckline. There are, of course, things you can do to refine that neckline shaping. And you have the same sort of shaping on the front and the back and both sleeves. So you have this kind of seam, or not seam, this angle. That angle of that shaping is kind of fixed. It's the same on the back as it is on the sleeve edge, all the way around. This can be a fantastic garment style for beginner knitters. If you're working in the round, you can cast on at the neck for top down. You can put in 4 markers, and then on every other round, you'll work an increase before and after your markers. And you'll make a sweater, and it's very satisfying, and it's very easy to follow. It can fit well in some sizes more than others, but for reasons I'm about to show you, the fit is always compromised by the kind of construction, by the limitations of basically the geometry of this shape. You're making this overall rectangle shape, and things start to get a bit weird when, if you're a designer, you might have experienced this, when you try and grade a raglan. Because if we look at my little example here, and I have my body and my sleeve, these might be worked all in the round, but it's easier to draw them out as separate pieces. I have the exact same shaping on my back piece as I do on my sleeve. And if my little mannequin, let's say, has a larger chest, then I'll want to kind of maybe pencil in my chest width. So that's kind of, if I'm working top down, that's then the goal of where I want to increase to. And maybe the neck is slightly wider, probably not much. So I'm gonna make my neck just very slightly wider. And then I'm going to connect those up with a line that has the same angle as I had for my smaller size, like so. And I want some shaping at the underarm. Having that little bridge just gives a more comfortable fit and means that you don't have to have quite as much extra fabric in the yoke. You've got some so that you can move freely, but putting in that kind of bridge helps reduce how much extra fabric you have there. But you can probably see, even with that little underarm bridge, if I have the same angle here in this size as I did for the smaller size, I've got to drop my underarm by the same length as I'm adding to this side. Every time I increase the chest width, I'm adding half of that width to the armhole depth, because half on each side. And if we're trying to grade from, say, maybe a 32-inch finished chest to a 62-inch finished chest, that's then a 30-inch difference all the way around. So that's 15 on each side, or 15 on the front and 15 on the back. And then I have, if I half that again, that means my yoke is 7.5 inches deeper than the yoke in my smallest size. And that's where we start getting underarms that come down to the waist, which can be cool if you're doing like a very dramatic batwing style sweater where you actually want your sleeve to kind of join on all the way down here. But if you're trying to grade a reasonably fitted raglan sweater, that underarm should never be down by the waist. That's not going to be comfortable, and it's going to look like a completely different style. It's probably also going to result in an upper arm, a sleeve bicep measurement that's much wider than you want it to be, because you've got to add the same number of stitches to the sleeve as you do to the body. And that's the basic issue with the raglan. You can play around with, well, I don't want that much yoke depth added, so I'm going to start with more stitches. But then you end up with, now the neck is getting wider and wider in proportion to the body as I grade up my sizes. And so once you start playing around, you end up with, well, maybe I don't need the same increase rate if I'm working top down. Maybe I can adjust those between the sizes or between the front and back and the sleeves. And that's where the compound raglan comes in. I first encountered the concept of the compound raglan in Maggie Righetti. I'm not 100% sure I'm saying her name right, but hopefully Maggie Righetti's book, Sweater Design in Plain English. If you have any interest in garment design, either for creating patterns to publish or for creating your own custom sweaters, I do really recommend this book. In lots of ways, it's quite dated in style, the style of the garments. It has only black and white photos and then illustrations. It was first published in 1990, so that makes sense, and I think it is now out of print, but it's fairly easy to find used. So I would highly recommend this. And while it is quite dated, if you consider that when this was published and for a good 15, if not 20 years after it was published, the vast majority of sweater patterns were published with 3 sizes, like small, medium, large, maybe extra large. It is a really size-inclusive approach to garment design, and the way the book is broken down is that she goes through how to create a particular style of sweater for a particular person. And so the people are different genders, different shapes, different sizes, different ages. And having those examples means that you get a really good overview of how to kind of problem solve fitting a particular construction to a different size, a different shape. It doesn't cover grading patterns and writing patterns for multiple sizes, but for an understanding of what kind of shapes you need to make as you're designing and what to consider, I think it's really helpful. And because she covers all of those different people, it's far, far more size inclusive than most resources I've seen on this subject in print, and certainly from this time period. I do feel like I need to add a note on some of the language and how she refers to plus sizes and plus size knitters, with the caveat that some of that language might not be the language that you're comfortable using for yourself or others. Some of it is pretty dated. It's also not something that I want to make the call on, because a lot of the language is how she refers to herself and to her own body. But that might be something where you want to go into it with just a little heads up that some of the language around body size and fatness is fairly dated and might not really use terms that you want to read or that might be a bit triggering. The chapter on compound raglans begins with an overview of the same issue that I just described, which Maggie Righetti describes as: the first problem is that most human bodies do not need a perfect rectangle of fabric. This problem is easier to visualize if we look at the body from the neck down. It is true that from the neck edge to the shoulder tip, we do not need a rectangle. If we have a little look at this tiny mannequin, you can kind of see that, I mean, this only really goes to the shoulders, but from the kind of neck to the shoulders, this rectangle of fabric is going to wrap around pretty well. But as soon as we add in a sleeve, if you imagine the sleeve, the arm doesn't go out like this. It starts kind of, we want fabric that will then slope more gently. But from the shoulder tip down to the actual body underarm, we do not. The body simply does not increase in width as fast as it does in length between these points. At the underarm, we need both to add 1 or 1.5 inches of length for ease and movement, and to move at a 45-degree angle into the armpit area. Then we need a flat horizontal area to travel under the arm to the side seam. So this is illustrated with this illustration here. And you can see that what the compound raglan does in sort of Maggie Righetti's version is that it takes our little back piece here, and instead of having the same angle all the way down, it starts off with that kind of angle. And then it has a shallower angle, and you've got kind of more of an S shape. This doesn't necessarily solve the problem where as you grade up sizes, that you want your yoke depth to be, or to increase less rapidly than the body circumference does. But it separates out the depth from the number of stitches that you're adding. And by doing that, it allows us to fine-tune things more. So we can have more underarm shaping. And by doing that, we can shorten our yoke because we don't need to add as many increased stitches. We can have a bigger section where we're increasing more rapidly, and then a shorter section where we're increasing less rapidly, and then a bigger one at the bottom, and more underarm shaping. So we can have a sort of larger section at the top where we're increasing more rapidly, and that's great, especially if you have broader shoulders. And then we could have a shorter section where we're not increasing as rapidly. Maggie Righetti splits it into increasing every other row or every other round, and then every 4 rounds or every 4 rows. and then we could have a shorter section of that, more like a 45-degree angle at the bottom, and then a much larger underarm cast on, so that the overall yoke depth is closer to my smaller size than this kind of original version was. Maggie Righetti's version, where you have sort of a 45-degree angle and then a much steeper slope, and then you go back to 45 degrees to create that kind of hinge at the underarm, and then you have a flat section, gives a fit that's much closer to the body in a lot of sizes. I've been playing around with that, and what I've found for the largest sizes, where we want a much more significant difference between that back neck measurement and the sort of half chest measurement than there is in the smallest sizes, is that it works really well to actually have an even shallower angle in that sort of hinge around the underarm section, so that you don't have to have, unless you want a really deep yoke, you don't have to have a really wide flat section across the underarm. So I've been doing that on the muscle bar sweater. I did that by increasing twice every other round, just because for the increased style I was using, it's neater to do that than to increase on every round, but it's the same total number of rounds and increases. So it's the same like angles, same mathematically. And because I don't want my sleeve to be too big, I'm only doing that on the body. In that section on the sleeves, I'm increasing every other round, like one increase every other round, so that I've got that more like that 45-degree angle. And that's just letting me fine tune the proportions of the sleeve to the body and the size, the sort of chest size to the yoke depth, because I want, as I grade up my sizes, I want small increases in the yoke depth to account for the fact that you're wrapping around more, a sort of more three-dimensional area. I do need a bit more depth in the yoke, but I don't want to lower where that underarm point is in relation to the body. So I want to reduce the differences between the yoke depth in compared to the differences between the chest sizes. So I hope that makes things a little bit clearer. If you are interested in kind of trying out creating your own compound raglan, then I would highly recommend this book. It's got all of instructions for how to do all of the maths, and these, what she calls floor plans of the pieces of how everything will fit together. And I like this quote. It says, "Juggling and adjusting are allowed and encouraged in designing raglans. If you need 2 inches of extra width at the back neck, but do not need it at the back chest underarm, you can alter the rate at which the decreases are made to get rid of the extra width." So I think that's a really good approach to raglans. I grade all of my patterns in a spreadsheet, and I work by creating all of the numbers for all of the sizes at once. I don't make a sample size and then grade up and down from it. I create the numbers for all of the sizes at once. And there is some juggling involved, but it's a lot of inefficient work to go through every size and kind of juggle numbers around. And so what I do is I try to use like body measurements as reference points for the kind of numbers that I want. And so I use a measurement that's often called the cross back width or back chest width. And that's kind of the measurement across, I'm doing the front of my chest because it's hard to show my back, but it's across from where, it's sometimes called the break point, but it's where if you put your arm by your side, you kind of see a crease forming. It's kind of straight across between the top of those creases. And I use that measurement as the measurement I want to get to, the number of stitches I want to get to on my front and back before I start kind of that more rapid shaping for the armhole, for the underarm. So I find that kind of helps me get closer to where I need to be without having to juggle everything for different sizes, or every size individually, which does get inefficient, and also means it's easy to create mistakes once those formulas start being different for every size. it's a really easy way to introduce mistakes and then make it hard for my tech editor to check. So that's how I work that. But the real goal is to be able to create a sweater and create that construction where the construction method you're using isn't constraining the proportions of your pieces, either between sizes or for just your own body for one size. Whereas our traditional kind of create a rectangle with a hole in the middle raglan method does constrain those proportions. If you want to make any one measurement bigger, you have to make them all bigger or smaller by the same kind of proportional rate. So compound raglan, really helpful. I feel like the way I'm doing it now is not quite the same as Maggie Righetti's compound raglan, but playing around with what she has, I think, is really helpful for understanding it and getting a better understanding of how you can create sweaters and garments that fit well, either for your own body or if you're a designer interested in more inclusive sizing and a better fit across sizes, then looking up Maggie Righetti's compound raglan will, I think, be really helpful. And I think it's exactly in the spirit in which she wrote it to take that as a jumping off point and play around with it. If you have knit a pattern that is a compound raglan that you really loved, do shout it out in the comments down below, or maybe if you've tried using this book to create your own, I'd love to know what your experience was like. If I hold up my Musselburgh yoke, this is partly why I didn't want to join or separate the back and front from the sleeves yet. Just about fits in my frame here. It's a little unwieldy, it's a big piece of knitted fabric. You can kind of see that it does make sort of a big rectangle of fabric, but it's sort of bowing out in the middle, and that's happening because my yoke depth is not as deep as it would be on a traditional raglan. I've kind of adjusted my increase rates so that it can be a bit shorter than it would be on a traditional raglan. That's because this has positive ease in the body. For my size, the yoke depth on a traditional raglan, if it didn't have that positive ease, might actually be fine. But because I have that positive ease, I'm increasing more rapidly on the body than I would be on a traditional raglan. And if I hold it up sort of like this, you can see that the sleeves don't stick out in a straight line, at least beyond the kind of shoulder point. Even if I should have done this on a table. Even if I hold this up, you can see my sleeve is sloping kind of the way that my arm does when it's by my side rather than sticking straight out. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this if I move close up, but you can see my increase line here, and this is the sleeve side. No, this is the back, and then this is the sleeve. And once I get down to sort of this section closer to the underarm, on the back I'm increasing every 2 rounds in this area, but on the sleeve I'm increasing only every 4 rounds, so that I'm adding fewer stitches, and that means I'm adding fewer stitches to the sleeve than to the body, so that my upper arm, my bicep measurement isn't proportional to the chest across all sizes. And as those sizes, I go up the size range, the section where you're increasing more often on the body than on the sleeves is kind of gets larger and larger, so that the sleeves are proportional to body measurements rather than to the chest measurement. Like they're proportional to sleeve measure or to arm measurements rather than the chest measurement. You might just be able to see here that if I sort of move my marker, you can see where the body has more rapid increases and is starting to kind of curve, and that's where I've increased twice on every other round. And on the sleeve I didn't need to increase to as many stitches, so I'm only increasing on every other round once on the sleeve. But that's where I've got more of a sort of little hinge of fabric that's going to wrap around under my underarm. So it's going to kind of curve under here and just give me that kind of fabric to move, that hinge for movement, rather than being fabric that gets me to the measurements I need across the chest and across the arm. Before I go, I do want to mention what I'm wearing. So this is the Inverleaf t-shirt, Inverleaf top, that I published several years ago, and I used a yarn that we dyed in our dye studio when I used to sell yarn, so that is unavailable, it is discontinued, and it's 2 strands of lace weight held together, so you could use a fingering or a sport weight yarn. The gauge is 23 stitches to 4 inches, so you could use a fingering or a sport weight yarn depending on the fabric that you want. And the yarn we used was merino linen silk blend, so any sort of plant-based yarn or plant-based and wool-based yarn blend would work really well. And this is a pretty fun knit. It's worked in the round from the top down, and it has shoulder shaping here. So you start by casting on across the back neck and shaping the shoulders with increases where you're increasing for the back and the front. And at the same time, you'll be working the front stitches, and when you get to kind of down here, you will increase for this kind of scooped neck curve and then cast on across the front. And after doing that, there's a section where you're working in the round until you get to the kind of edge of the shoulder, edge of the sleeve here, and then you work the kind of upper front and upper back separately to the underarm, and then join in the round and work the body in the round, and then it's finished with this kind of folded cuff detail that I really like, sort of mimicking ready-to-wear t-shirts with that kind of folded sleeve, folded cuff detail, and it's just worked by picking up stitches in the round, you can see here, and then you work in the stockinette with a little section in reverse stockinette, so that when you fold it, that kind of looks almost like a tab that connects to that shoulder shaping. And I really love the way the shoulder shaping forms this kind of line across the shoulder. So that's the Inverleaf top. It is a size inclusive design. Let's find exactly what that means. So there are 12 sizes, from a 36 3/4 to a 71 inch finished body circumference, and you want a decent amount of positive ease. This has about 7 on me, 6 or 7 inches, probably between about 4 and 8 inches of positive ease. And there are also 2 cup sizing options for all sizes. So there's instructions for A to C cups or for D plus cups. So that is the Inverleaf pattern. It uses really basic knitting skills. If you can knit and purl, cast on and bind off, pick up stitches, work flat and in the round, and then do some simple increases and decreases, then you could absolutely create the Inverleaf pattern. And it's a really nice loose style to wear when it is warm out, and I think we are actually going to get some sunshine this weekend, so I might take this home and try and wear it over the weekend. And whatever you are doing this weekend, I'm going to try and make some progress on my muscle breast sweater body, I think, and also hopefully get out for a hike with my family. So whatever you are doing this weekend, I hope you have a really good one, and thanks for watching. I'm Ysolda on Ravelry and Instagram. You can find my patterns on Ravelry and on my website, which is ysolda.com. And I mentioned the Knitwear, our sort of online social and learning platform. So if you would like to join that community, it's free to join. I will put a link to that in the show notes down below. And I will be back as soon as I can with another episode, because I'm having so much fun chatting about knitting with you. And do leave me a comment down below if you're enjoying this format, and if there is anything that you would like me to cover or any questions you'd like me to answer, go ahead and put those in the comments and I will do my best to do so in the next video. Bye!